In my view, the current plan of trying to help Greece with an IMF EU program is not going to work because the problems of Greece are not solvable. Greece is not just a case of illiquidity, it's a case of insolvency. The fiscal adjustment that is required of them is going to be very hard to achieve. It might lead to a further fall in output. In addition to the fiscal problem, there is this loss of competitiveness. They need a real devaluation to restore competitiveness. Within the monetary union, they cannot do it. Therefore, I think that plan is not going to work.
So it's just not a matter of sending the country more cash?
No, I think that the official sector might send a lot of cash. It's going to just postpone the need for a debt restructuring, for a real devaluation. It's not going to avoid it. Therefore, we have to move to a plan B that essentially includes a restructuring of the public debt of Greece, maybe even an exit of Greece from the monetary union.
We've already seen downgrades in the past 24 hours, Greece, Portugal, Spain. What country most concerns you?
Well, after Greece, I think that the two countries that are really at risk right now are both Portugal and Spain. Like in Greece, they share a common problem, large budget deficits, large stocks of public debt, loss of competitiveness, weak economic growth, large current account deficit. So while the situation in Portugal and Spain is not as dire yet as in Greece, if there is a disorderly collapse of Greece, the contagion to Spain and Portugal is going to be significant, and it's already clear in terms of spreads in the markets.
Where would you put the risk that there is a collapse in Greece?
I think that there is a very high likelihood that even if there is an IMF program, the spreads are not going to narrow, that the debt of Greece is unsustainable, and therefore a debt restructuring is unavoidable. If you put a lot of official money on the table, you can postpone that debt restructuring by 6 months and a year, but the markets are already pricing in the high probability of a need to restructure the debt and reduce the face value of that debt. So I think that that's unavoidable in my view.
Unavoidable?
Yes.
You've called this the first test of viability for the Eurozone. How does this likely, in all likelihood, play out?
Today there is a rising risk that actually some of the members of the Eurozone would eventually be forced to get out of the Eurozone. There's a clear understanding that Greece probably should have not joined the Union in the first place because it was not ready for it. Of course, an exit from the monetary union will be very complicated and disorderly. There is a risk that then the market is going to say who's going to be next, Portugal, Spain, you name it.
So what does that do? Sorry, what does that do to the Eurozone to have one and maybe more participants pull out?
Well, in the first place, it means that the value of the euro is going to weaken significantly further. Secondly, that the euro is going to be less and less of a reserve currency because reserve currencies have to be liquid and not have credit sovereign risk. And right now there is sovereign risk in some parts of the eurozone. It may imply that over time you're going to have a smaller eurozone that's going to be a core of countries that are much more homogeneous, that have fiscal discipline and so on. And some of the laggards over the next few years might have to exit.
Well, how would you view a smaller, more stable, if you will, eurozone?
Well, in the long run it makes sense, but the transition from the current union to a smaller one is going to be a very messy one because the European legal institutions do not even allow formally for an exit of a country from the monetary union. And if you exit the monetary union, you have to exit also the European Union. So it's going to be a very messy process for Greece and other countries eventually to get out of this monetary union, if we get to that point.
Messy and destabilizing, as you say. Let's switch gears and talk about the U.S. recovery. How would you characterize where we sit today, the U.S. recovery?
Well, in the first half of the year, I believe that the recovery is going to be more robust than the second half of the year. 3% growth in the first half, lower than 2% in the second half, because in the short run there are a number of temporary factors like the fiscal stimulus, restocking of inventories, base effects, the census hiring workers, the tax credit for home buyers that are boosting demand. But some of it is still in demand from the future. Once this effect phase out in the second half of the year, in my view, the recovery of consumption and capex spending in residential and commercial real estate is going to be anemic. We still need to deleverage, save more, spend less, and that implies a weak economic growth, weak labor market, unemployment rate remaining close to 10%.
For how long does that play out?
In the next 2 years, I expect economic growth in the United States to be below trend, closer to 2% than 3%, for example.
So next 2 years, 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
an uptick when then? 2012?
It depends, because there is another looming problem in the United States. It is the one of very large budget deficits. Today, the bond vigilantes have woken up in Greece, in Spain, in Portugal, in Ireland, even in UK. They have not yet woken up in the United States, but the current path of fiscal policy is obviously unsustainable. $1.5 trillion deficit this year, $1 trillion next year, another $1 trillion in 2012. In the next 3 years, unless we change our fiscal stance by raising revenue and cutting spending, the chances that the bond vigilante is going to wake up and spike long rates is significant. And that's one of the important downside risks to a more robust recovery of the US economy over time.
At one point you were concerned, you said there was a chance, 20% or so chance of a double-dip recession in this country. Is that still a concern?
It is still a concern. I would say it's not my main scenario. The main scenario is of a U-shaped recovery. I'm worried about the double dip in the Eurozone today, given what's happening. I'm even worried about the double dip in Japan because the recovery is anemic. In the US, things are relatively to Europe and Japan better, but as I said, there are many risks that we're facing in the US, and the one of achieving medium-term fiscal sustainability is probably the key issue today in the United States.